Massmart next. This one was built up from the South African branch of the Dutch retailer Makro. I forget what the Dutch controlling company was, something like SBV or something. And the Wooltrue Group had the rights to that. And then Massmart was spun off out of that under the leadership of Mark Lamberti. And it has grown since then, massive. It owns Game as well, because it bought that somewhere along the line. Builders Warehouse, again, a very interesting brand, globally styled on Home Depot and that kind of thing. DionWired, which is a bit like a Best Buy, which is the electronic stuff, and then Cambridge as well, which is in the cash and carry type of niche. It's 51% held by Walmart, the largest retailer in the world out of the USA. Market cap of 33.4 billion rand, dividend yield of 2.4, price to earnings ratio a very high 32.8. And Chris, I guess the story here is that after the deal, which happened somewhere in the middle there at around 148, it's been a bit of a sloppy performer. And I guess that's because despite all the promise that it hasn't really delivered much in terms of the profits. They've seemed a bit scarce.
Profits have been disappointing. Look, I think you have to bear in mind with Massmart, this is going to be a long-term prospect. And, excuse me, the fund managers who are backing this one, predominantly in the US and the UK, have taken that long-term view. So they're not concerned, they're not fazed by this one. And it's fascinating that although you might think that because they're a subsidiary of the biggest retailer in the world, that Walmart would be directing all the operations. No, in fact, they're not. Walmart's learned an awful lot from Massmart, particularly in supply chain logistics into the rest of Africa, where they've been for many years. But secondly, on things like you mentioned Builders Warehouse, which they don't really have much of a representation in the US particularly. So they're picking up a lot from Massmart, ironically, in other words, from the subsidiary. So I think that's working very, very well. But yes, you're right. They're struggling, I think, to get any decent earnings growth. They're doing they're doing quite a few changes, if you like, at the periphery particularly. And they're also competing, let's not forget, in the food retailing market with things like Cambridge, which you mentioned earlier, and Game Food Co. Collectively, they've got about 3, maybe 4% of the food market, which is tiny, and that is not anywhere near where Walmart wants to be. Yep. So they want to be much, much bigger than that, and as a result, because they're doing lots of heavy promotions, they're putting lots of fresh in there, which is good margin stuff. They're playing in that field very, very nicely indeed, and they're disrupting the market. And a lot of other players are perhaps suffering a bit because of that.
Yeah, and you'd expect them to be capable of anything. So they're going to build the distribution centres, because there's no problem in terms of access to capital for investment.
Precisely.
So I guess what you're saying is that from Walmart's point of view, the way the board will think about these things is a very long-term view, strategic view. And as you say, if you're a Boston-based fund manager, you love the idea that Walmart owns 51% of it, because then you assume that they're going to run it like they run all of their businesses, which is pretty professionally. Okay, but one thing that sort of struck me is that in the lead into the deal, Grant Patterson, the CEO, was singing the praises of the group. 2 years or 3 years later, he's saying, no, we've still got so much to learn. So that did seem to me to be slightly strange, that at some point they'd appeared to be sort of firing on all cylinders, and now they're a little bit apologetic for the way that things have gone in the last little while.
Yeah, look, I was on an Investor Day field trip with them last week, and we went to see a number of the operations. And we went down to the new Makro, for example, down in Alberton. And that was fascinating how that's starting to pan out. You're starting to see a lot more in the way of individual items being able to be purchased. In the old days, it was like 24 cans of baked beans or nothing. Now they're making it much more towards the individual consumer, bearing in mind that it's a combination of individual consumer, trade for their own account or trade for resale. And it's fascinating the way they're fine-tuning it and trying to keep a nice balance there. And obviously the whole Walmart thing is feeding into this because of their experience with things like Sam's Club in the US.
Right.
So they are learning, make no mistake, and I think that's why I say they're being very innovative, they're learning a lot, they're putting a lot of these learnings into practice, and I think it will take a bit of time to tweak these to everyone's satisfaction. And in the meantime, I think the outlook for earnings growth probably, unfortunately, will be a little bit on the dull side.
Yeah. One quick question about Cambridge. I mean, you reminded me that Cambridge is quite a novel approach, because it's really limited lines and it's in high traffic sort of taxi rank type situations. From your site visit, did you get a sense that the Cambridge thing is really starting to get traction now?
Cambridge is looking fantastic. We went to the Struben Street one in Pretoria last week, and what strikes you first of all, it's not as and this is going to sound a little bit patronizing, it's not as grubby as you might intuitively think.
They look very grubby from the outside.
Yeah, look, it's spotless inside, and there's a bigger range of products than you might intuitively think.
Okay.
What about 6,500, 7,000 SKUs? So they're selling that. I mean, they're even selling small fridges about that size, for example, which you can get into a taxi. So, you know, again, they're putting a lot more general merchandise into these things, which were predominantly food. Again, this is all part and parcel of this getting to know that type of consumer a lot better.
And they've got excellent IT systems, so they'll iteratively learn about what people are buying and selling, and obviously widen the floor space for that and narrow it elsewhere.
Exactly.
Good. So overall, even at this level, it's about 160 Rand a share, or perhaps particularly at this level. You like it? You're hot on it?
I like it. I wouldn't say I'm hot. I like it, but I do think it's probably going to languish a little bit for a year or so yet. So I can't say I'm hot on it, but I like the story.